convoy yard at Falcon Ridge training area buzzed with the sharp confidence of youth just after dawn. Engines idling in a neat line of matte green transport trucks, while young troops joked over radios and checked straps with the restless energy of men who believed the map in their hands was the final word on reality. And standing just off to the side, almost deliberately out of the way, was an old veteran everyone referred to as the Observer, an elderly American male with a white beard, weathered face, faded red shirt tucked into blue jeans, and worn boots dusted the color of the desert, leaning lightly on a walking stick not because he needed it, but because it gave him time to watch. He had been invited by command as a historical consultant for the field exercise, a polite title that meant nothing to the platoon leaders who had already memorized the route overlays and printed satellite imagery that promised a smooth run through a canyon pass marked safe and efficient. And when the old man stepped closer and calmly said, "Not that route," it landed like a fly buzzing at a briefing table, noticed, then swatted away with a smirk. One lieutenant laughed openly and tapped the laminated map. "Sir, this route was cleared twice," he said, confident, voice carrying so everyone could hear. "Terrain analysis, drone scan, weather check." A few soldiers chuckled, one whispering, "Maps don't lie," another adding, "Guess the old-timer-s thinking of a different war." The veteran didn't argue, he didn't raise his voice. He simply pointed with two fingers at a bend in the canyon marked by a clean blue line and said quietly, "That curve eats convoys when the ground's been dry too long." The lieutenant grinned wider. "Respectfully, sir," he replied, "not respectful at all. This isn't the 70s. Laughter rippled through the group, helmets bobbing, rifles slung casually, and the old man stepped back, eyes narrowing not in anger but calculation, because he recognized the sound of confidence hardening into disregard. He walked along the trucks, listening to engines, feeling vibrations through the soles of his boots, watching dust lift and drift the wrong direction despite a calm forecast, noticing how the wind funneled through the canyon mouth in pulses rather than a steady stream, details the map didn't show. The platoon sergeant clapped his hands and called them to mount up, radios crackling to life as drivers eased forward, and one private leaned out his window toward the old man, laughing. "Hey, sir," he called, "if we don't make it back, tell the map it was wrong." More laughter followed, sharp and careless, and the old man met the soldier's eyes briefly, saying nothing, because he knew warnings given twice to deaf ears became distractions. As the convoy rolled out, the old man watched the lead vehicle turn toward the canyon road, dust blooming behind it like a curtain being drawn, and a quiet weight settled in his chest, not fear, not panic, but the heavy certainty of patterns repeating. He remembered a different canyon decades earlier, a different map just as clean, just as confident, and the way the ground there had looked solid until weight and heat and vibration woke it up. The radios faded as the convoy disappeared between the rock walls, and the training area fell strangely quiet, the kind of quiet that arrives when momentum has already chosen its direction. The old man stood there longer than anyone expected, eyes fixed on the ridgeline, counting seconds, watching the dust plume twist and stall instead of dispersing, and he murmured to no one in particular, "You should have taken the long way," because the stakes were no longer about pride or being right. They were about how unforgiving terrain could be when experience was mocked as memory instead of data. Keep listening, and which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more. Inside the canyon, the convoy tightened instinctively, trucks falling into closer spacing as the rock walls narrowed and the sunlight fractured into sharp angles that played tricks on depth and distance. And over the radio, the earlier laughter returned, louder now that the veteran was miles behind them. "Smooth ride," one driver joked. "Map's treating us real nice." Another chimed in, "Guess the old guy forgot geology class." The lieutenant leading the convoy smiled to himself, eyes flicking between the road and the GPS tablet mounted beside the steering wheel. Reassured by the blue line that traced their progress perfectly, every turn anticipated, every elevation change accounted for, or so it claimed. What the map didn't show was how the ground beneath the road had been baked brittle by weeks of heat, how fine dust layered over compacted soil like flour over ice, or how the vibrations from heavy vehicles echoed and multiplied between canyon walls, shaking loose things that had waited patiently for weight and rhythm to align. The second truck hit the bend the veteran had pointed at, and the driver felt it before he saw it, a subtle shift, a softness where there shouldn't have been any, and he laughed nervously into the radio. "Road-'s got some bounce," he said. "Feels like driving on a drum." The lieutenant brushed it off. "Stay centered," he replied. "Maintain speed." Behind them, a private cracked a joke. "Maybe the canyon's just stretching." Laughter crackled through the net, but it sounded thinner now, edged with something uneasy. As the convoy pushed deeper, dust stopped drifting upward and instead hugged the road, swirling low and thick, reducing visibility to a few truck lengths, and the canyon began to amplify sound, the engines, the clatter of gear, the radios, until it all blended into a constant pressure that pressed against ears and nerves. The veteran's voice came back to the lieutenant uninvited. "That curve eats convoys." The lieutenant shook his head, annoyed at the thought, and glanced at the map again, trusting its clean certainty over a memory that wasn't his. Then the lead truck's rear wheels dipped sharply, not enough to stop it, but enough to jolt everyone forward, and the driver swore. "Road just dropped," he reported. The lieutenant frowned. "Report damage." "No damage," the driver said, breathing faster, "but the shoulder's gone." The joke responses didn't come this time. The third truck braked hard, tires skidding slightly, and the radio filled with overlapping voices as spacing collapsed and drivers fought to keep control. "Easy," the lieutenant ordered, tension creeping into his voice. "Easy." The convoy slowed, engines revving unevenly, and then the fourth truck's right side sank a few inches, metal groaning as weight shifted toward the canyon wall. "I'm sliding," the driver shouted. "I'm sliding." The lieutenant's heart spiked. "Countersteer," he barked. "Don't stop." The instruction came straight from doctrine, straight from maps and manuals, but doctrine didn't account for ground that had turned granular under pressure, or for the way vibration traveled through layers and loosened more with every second. A low rumble rolled through the canyon, not loud enough to be called an explosion, not sudden enough to be dramatic, but deep and unmistakable, like the earth clearing its throat. "What was that?" a private asked, voice sharp. The rumble came again, stronger, and small rocks began to skitter down the canyon wall, pinging against metal. Panic flared. "Rock fall!" someone yelled. The lieutenant's grip tightened on the wheel. "All vehicles halt," he ordered, then immediately regretted it as weight shifted forward and tires dug into unstable ground. The second truck fishtailed slightly, dust exploding upward, and the canyon filled with shouts, engines revving and cutting, radios squealing with overlapping commands. In the chaos, the lieutenant remembered the veteran's calm certainty, the way he hadn't argued, hadn't pleaded, just stated a fact born of repetition, and for the first time that morning, doubt cracked the armor of his confidence. "Control," the lieutenant called over the radio, forcing his voice steady. "This is lead. We've got ground instability at grid." The transmission cut off in a burst of static as another section of the road slumped, not collapsing fully, but sagging enough to tilt vehicles toward the drop. A private screamed as his truck lurched, brakes screaming, and for a terrifying second it looked like the whole convoy might slide sideways together. The lieutenant slammed his door open and jumped down, boots skidding on gravel as he ran forward, shouting commands he wasn't sure anyone could hear. Dust choked the air, reducing the world to noise and vibration, and somewhere in that chaos, the laughter from earlier felt impossibly distant, replaced by the raw sound of men realizing the map had not lied. But it had not told the whole truth either. Miles away, the old veteran stood on the ridgeline, binoculars raised, watching the dust plume stall and thicken instead of flowing through. His jaw tightening slightly as the canyon did exactly what he had warned it would do, and he turned toward the radio set beside him, already knowing the call that was coming would be too late to prevent consequences, but maybe not too late to prevent catastrophe. The canyon no longer felt like terrain. It felt like a decision that had already been made, and as the convoy struggled to stabilize, the lieutenant realized with a cold clarity that the map had stopped being useful the moment the ground stopped behaving like a drawing. Radios crackled back to life in broken fragments, voices overlapping with panic barely restrained by training. "Lead, this is 4, I've lost traction on the right. 6 is stuck, rear axle sinking. We've got rock movement on the north wall." The lieutenant wiped dust from his eyes and forced himself to breathe, remembering procedure not as rules but as priorities. People first, vehicles second, pride last. "Kill engines," he ordered, voice sharp now, no room for debate. "Set brakes. Everyone dismount on the high side only." The command cut through the chaos, and one by one engines died, leaving behind an unnatural silence broken only by settling rocks and the creak of stressed metal. Soldiers scrambled out carefully, boots slipping on loose gravel, faces pale beneath dust-streaked helmets, eyes finally seeing the canyon for what it was: narrow, unstable, alive. A private looked up and whispered, "This wasn't on the map," and the words hung there like an accusation no one answered. Above them, more pebbles rattled loose, then stones, then a sheet of dirt slid down the wall in a slow, terrifying curtain. "Move back!" someone yelled, and the group pressed closer to the rock face, hearts pounding, rifles clutched awkwardly against chests as if they offered protection from geology. The lieutenant keyed his radio again. "Control, this is lead. We need engineers and recovery now. Route compromised." This time the transmission went through and the reply came tight and controlled. Copy, lead, hold position, assistance inbound. As if summoned by the words, a new voice cut in on a different frequency, calm, familiar, unmistakable. "This is Observer," the old veteran said, his voice steady despite the distance. "Lieutenant, do you copy?" The lieutenant froze for half a second, shame and relief colliding in his chest. "I copy," he replied. "We're unstable." There was no judgment in the veteran's response, only confirmation. "I know," he said. "You're sitting on decomposed shale layered over hardpan. It looks solid until it is." The lieutenant swallowed. "How do we get out?" he asked, and the act of asking felt like tearing something loose inside him. The veteran didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked a question. "What's your spacing?" "Too tight," the lieutenant admitted. "We closed it earlier." A pause. "That's why it's moving," the veteran said. "Vibration plus weight. You need to unload the canyon." He gave clear, precise instructions. Redistribute personnel on foot, reduce load from the heaviest vehicle, use the lead truck's winch as a stabilizer instead of pulling forward, angle the wheels uphill, not straight. The lieutenant relayed the commands, and for the first time since entering the canyon, the soldiers moved with purpose instead of panic. As they worked, the veteran's voice stayed on the net, guiding without commanding, explaining not just what to do but why, turning the canyon from a monster into a problem that could be solved. "Maps show lines," he said. "They don't show memory. This ground remembers weight." The lieutenant listened, humbled, watching his troops regain control inch by inch, and the truth settled in hard and undeniable. The veteran hadn't been guessing, hadn't been nostalgic or dramatic. He had been reading the land the way others read screens. Hours later, when engineers arrived and the convoy was finally stabilized enough to begin a slow, careful extraction the long way around, the soldiers were exhausted, dust-caked, and quiet. No one joked. No one laughed. As they emerged from the canyon and saw the veteran waiting near the ridge, standing exactly where he'd been that morning, the lieutenant felt the full weight of consequence, not casualties, not destroyed vehicles, but the knowledge of how close arrogance had come to turning training into tragedy. He dismounted, walked toward the old man, and stopped a respectful distance away. "You were right," he said simply. The veteran nodded once. "You learned," he replied. "That matters more." The lieutenant looked back at his convoy, shaken, safe, changed, and then back at the veteran. "Who were you?" he asked quietly. The old man's eyes drifted toward the canyon, distant now. "A long time ago," he said, "I was the one who made those maps after I learned which routes lied." The sun was already leaning west when the convoy finally cleared the canyon, engines idling on stable ground as dust settled slowly like fallout from a mistake nobody would joke about again. And the lieutenant stood facing the old veteran with a posture far different from that morning. Shoulders squared not with arrogance, but with respect, helmet tucked under his arm, eyes steady. Around them, young troops moved quietly, checking vehicles, rehydrating, avoiding each other's gaze as if noise itself had become something dangerous. And when the senior command vehicles arrived in a low cloud of dust, the shift in gravity was immediate. A colonel stepped out first, followed by a general whose reputation preceded him, his eyes scanning the scene with sharp efficiency until they landed on the veteran, and in that instant the general stopped walking. The colonel noticed and froze as well. "Sir?" the colonel asked quietly. The general didn't answer right away. He stared at the old man, white beard, faded red shirt, worn boots dusted from the canyon, and then his expression changed, recognition striking hard enough to make his jaw tighten. "I'll be damned," the general murmured. The lieutenant felt his stomach drop. The general walked forward alone, ignoring salutes, ignoring reports, until he stood directly in front of the veteran, and for a moment neither spoke, the silence heavy with history the younger soldiers could feel but not yet understand. Then the general did something no one expected. He stepped back, heels together, spine straight, and rendered a sharp, deliberate salute to the old man. Every soldier nearby froze, shock rippling through the group like electricity. The veteran hesitated just a fraction of a second, then returned the salute with perfect precision, the kind that came from muscle memory etched deep, not practiced for show. The general lowered his hand and exhaled. "You warned them," he said, not as a question. The veteran nodded once. "I did." The general turned toward the convoy, voice carrying now. "And they didn't listen," he continued, his tone calm but lethal. "Which is exactly how men die in places like this." He looked back at the lieutenant, who stood rigid, shame burning behind his eyes. "Do you know who this is?" the general asked. The lieutenant swallowed. "No, sir." The general nodded slowly. "This man planned half the root doctrine we still teach," he said. "He walked these canyons before satellites could spell their names. He buried friends because maps said safe and the ground disagreed." A collective breath left the soldiers. The general's voice hardened. He wasn't giving an opinion this morning. He was giving you data written in scars. The lieutenant stepped forward despite the knot in his chest. "Sir," he said to the veteran, "I mocked your warning." The veteran met his gaze calmly. "You trusted the tools you were given," he replied. "That's human. Ignoring the people who have outlived those tools, that's where it goes wrong." The general nodded approvingly. "That's why he's here," he said. "Not to command, to remind." He turned to the troops. "Today's exercise is over," he announced. "Not because you failed, but because you learned the hard way without paying the full price." The soldiers stood straighter, absorbing the weight of that sentence. The veteran glanced once more toward the canyon, now quiet, deceptively harmless in the fading light. "Routes change," he said softly, "but land remembers." The general looked at him with something like gratitude. "Still teaching," he said. The veteran gave a faint shrug. "Only when they're willing to listen." And as the convoy prepared to move again, this time along the longer, safer path, the laughter from the morning felt like it belonged to another lifetime, replaced by the humbling knowledge that expertise doesn't always wear rank, and the most dangerous words a soldier can say are, "The map says it's fine." The convoy rolled out again just before dusk, engines humming at a careful pace along the longer route the veteran had recommended from the beginning. And this time there were no jokes over the radio, no casual chatter to fill the silence, only short, professional check-ins and the steady rhythm of wheels on stable ground. The soldiers rode differently now, eyes scanning terrain instead of screens, heads turning to read slopes and shadows, every vibration questioned instead of ignored, and the lieutenant felt the change like a weight lifting and settling at the same time, because humility, he realized, was heavier than confidence but far more reliable. When they reached the staging area and shut down engines, the men dismounted quietly, forming up without being told, instinctively waiting for instruction that didn't come. The general had already departed, leaving the lesson behind without ceremony, and the old veteran stood a short distance away, hands resting on his walking stick, watching the troops with the same calm attention he'd shown all day. One by one, the soldiers approached him, not as a group, not with bravado, but individually, stripped of humor and ego. A private spoke first, voice rough. "Sir, I laughed when you warned us." The veteran nodded gently. "You won't again," he said, not as a threat, but as a certainty. Another soldier stepped forward. "You saved us from losing trucks, maybe worse." The veteran shook his head. "You saved yourselves when you finally listened," he replied. The lieutenant waited until the others had finished, then stepped forward, helmet under his arm, posture straight. "I trusted the map more than the man," he said. "That won't happen again." The veteran studied him for a long moment, then gave a small approving nod. "Maps are tools," he said. "Experience is a warning system. You need both." The words settled deep, the kind that didn't need to be written down to be remembered. As darkness crept in and stars began to emerge over the desert, the veteran turned to leave, walking slowly toward the ridge road where a lone utility truck waited. Before he reached it, the lieutenant called out, "Sir, will we see you again?" The old man paused, looked back once, and allowed himself the faintest smile. "If there's another route someone's too sure about," he said, "probably." He climbed into the truck and drove off, taillights shrinking into the night, leaving behind a group of soldiers forever changed by a warning they'd almost ignored. Long after the engines cooled and the gear was stowed, the lieutenant gathered his platoon and spoke without notes or doctrine. "Today," he said, "we learned that expertise doesn't always carry rank, and danger doesn't care how confident you feel." He looked out toward the dark canyon in the distance. "We were lucky. Next time, luck won't be part of the plan." The soldiers nodded, understanding that this wasn't just a training story to be retold. It was a marker in their careers, a moment where arrogance had brushed close enough to consequence to leave a scar without drawing blood. In the weeks that followed, whenever routes were briefed and maps unfolded, someone always asked, "What's the ground say?" And no one laughed at the question. And somewhere out there, the old veteran continued his quiet work, not seeking recognition, not wearing medals or titles, just offering warnings to those willing to hear them, because he knew the truth better than most. Wars don't punish ignorance nearly as fast as they punish arrogance, and the land always gets the final vote.